I spent the first 10, 15 years of my career really focused on trying to be the smartest guy in the room.
Have you ever met someone who is a chief financial officer, an equity partner, the honorary consul of a country, and the founder of one of the largest cultural events in Utah, all at the same time? I'm your host, Alessandro Cozzi, and today we are joined by exactly that person. Nick Fuoco, welcome to Behind Numbers.
Thank you, Alessandro. Great to be here.
So we do have so much to unpack here. But let's start from way back, because I really believe that our childhood shapes who we become and who we are. So can you tell us a bit of your childhood? Where did you grow up? And what kind of person and a teenager were you?
No, absolutely. I don't know if you want to know too much about my teenage years, but yeah, I grew up here in Salt Lake City. So born and raised here, very committed to the community. I come from an immigrant family. So my grandparents immigrated here. And on my mom's side, grew up in a very kind of middle-class family. My grandpa was a teacher. My grandma was a nurse. And so I just really had those experiences that shaped me. My immigrant grandparents came from Italy. One was a baker and one was a cook at a senior living facility. And so I grew up with those kind of humble roots, and it's something that's always resonated with me, and something that I've been passionate about is how can I use the privilege that I've been lucky enough to have now in my life, that how I can help people and how I can be of service to the community and to my place of work and to my organizations that I contribute to. And how can I really think holistically and have a more empathetic approach to how we solve problems and approach people and work with others.
Which is what you have done throughout your whole life. And then during college, you started looking at finance. What first drew you to finance?
Interesting enough, so I come from a family of accountants. So I never had any plans to get into accounting originally. My dad's a CPA, my uncle's a CPA. My uncle was actually a partner in the Ernst & Young office in Rome, Italy. And so I lived with him when I lived in Italy. And so was always around this throughout my life, but it never was something that I was passionate about. And then I went to college at Westminster College, and really the first great influence I had on my life, at least from an accounting perspective, outside of my family, was my first college professor in Accounting 101, Alan Rogers. He's touched a lot of people in this community in Utah. And I really just fell in love with accounting because there's always a right answer. The whole logical way of thinking where it's not overly math focused, but it is math focused in that everything must be in balance. And that kind of cleanliness to the thought process resonated with me. And then on top of that, I really saw it as the language of business. And so as I was thinking about whether it's marketing or other things that I've really gravitated towards and been passionate about, it all comes back to numbers and accounting, because you can learn all those things later, which I've been able to do through some other studies and work experience. But having a foundational understanding of numbers and accounting and putting together a P&L and all those things just really resonated with me in college. And I just naturally gravitated towards it.
So all your family was inside the same space that you were there. Well, why don't I try it out? And then you find out that you really liked it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm guessing that when you started in accounting and finance was more owning the numbers. But as you grew inside finance, then you have also become a CFO. That more than owning those numbers is owning the outcomes. How uncomfortable was for you that shift from owning just the numbers and really now owning those outcomes?
Yeah, I think what I've learned, and I learned this early in my career because I was just thrown into a lot of really unique situations. I graduated in 2006 from college, and obviously that was a really interesting time to be entering into business with the Great Recession shortly after and all the issues with the housing bubble and everything. So I really had to wear lots of hats, and I always gravitated towards that because I very much don't see myself as an accountant. I always say that I'm an operational business leader that happens to understand numbers. And so very much consider myself a capable and average accountant, but I like to consider myself more of a capable business person, and working with functional leaders and really trying to understand what's important to them and how we can move the business forward. And I think accounting becomes calling the balls and strikes, but how you actually deliver success from an operational perspective, you really have to understand how business works. And that's something that I've been passionate about trying to pursue in my career, whether it's sales to marketing to operations to warehouse management. Those are all things that I've really gravitated towards that weren't necessarily fitting in that box of accounting. And I think it served me well in my career.
But how could you do it? How could you build up that vision, not just owning those numbers, but owning what is going to come after those numbers, how we can drive those numbers?
Absolutely. Great question. I think when I go into an organization, the first thing I do is I use the numbers as the baseline to look at, but then I peel back the onion there and I want to go deep into what each number is driven by. So if it's a sales number, I actually want to go do a walk along with sales leaders, right? So I'll go, whether it's go sit in on a sales call or go to a sales meeting or have a contract negotiation with a customer. I actually really enjoy that. And so I've just naturally gravitated to that. But I found that was the best way to really understand how the numbers are made is to go walk a mile in those people's shoes. And I think not only does that help you learn the business, it's also helps you earn credibility because if you're able to sit aside them, see their struggles, see what they're up against, because sitting in a CFO seat, it's really easy to say, oh, sales guy, you just go get more margin. It's not that hard. But if you're actually there with them going through those negotiations and you've walked in their shoes, you realize that there's more to the story. And so that's the number one thing that I do. And I continue to try to do in my career. I think if you talk to any of the salespeople here at our organization now, they see me as an advocate and a partner in the business that will actually go sit and do customer calls with them and help with the negotiations and be there as a resource.
And while you were building these companies, which were one of the two most common or hardest decisions that you had to make?
I think obviously personnel decisions are always the toughest, right? I think that throughout my career, I've had a couple of experiences that really resonated with me. The analogy I use, and we've dealt with this before, but sometimes I've gone into businesses and there's been legacy people that have been there for a really long time and they have a lot of tribal knowledge, but they're not the right culture fit and they're not growing with the business. And the analogy that I've used is sometimes you have to prune the tree for the sake of the overall tree, right? And so as much as you might not want to make some really tough decisions from a people perspective, sometimes the good of the overall unit, the overall business, you have to make some really tough decisions. And those are ones that have resonated with me. I have one specific example that still touches me to this day, but I had a gentleman when I was on my team, and I won't get into specific details here, but there was some issues with, this is early in my career, but there was some issues with timekeeping management and maybe not having the most honesty. And there was some warnings around that. And it was unique in that also at this larger company, his parents also happened to work at the company and they were immigrants to this country. And they actually reminded me a lot of my grandparents. And so when we end up having an issue and the final straw happened, I actually talked to his parents first. And I said, hey, this is the situation that happened. I wanted you to hear it from me because this is my decision. I own this and this really hurts me. But this is the right thing for our company. And this is how we have to protect the culture that we're trying to build. And that conversation was handled in a way with what I believe was empathy and really thinking through that whole thing. That person ended up coming back into the business a few years later, and they really grew from that experience. And now they're in a senior leadership position at that company. I'm no longer there anymore, but it's probably one of the best examples of what I felt was a really difficult decision and somebody that I actually really liked. He was probably my best employee, but it was a decision that we had to make to respect the culture of the team that we were trying to build, but also the culture of the company. And it ended up being the right decision because they learned from that and they've now gone on and grown in their career and actually come back and have really used that as a learning experience. And so that's just one example of decisions that we all have to make as leaders around making the decision that's right for the overall group or the company. And sometimes the human element is really difficult. And so I've always tried to think about that holistically and how some of those decisions can drive and push us forward and build the right culture we want to build.
And while you were doing all this, then one day you woke up and you built up one of the biggest cultural events here in Utah. Tell us more. Why did you start it? How did you start it? And how did you now have it with more than 50,000 people joining every single year?
Yeah, that's a great story. So I guess I'm not good at saying no is the first thing, right? And I can say that all these experiences have helped me professionally, obviously personally, but professionally too, because to build an event like that, right? There's obviously marketing that goes into it. There's operations. There's all these like little things that you make and the decisions you make and things you learn that help me, build credibility and build knowledge as I take to my professional work. So the origin story of Festa Italiana Salt Lake City is really unique. We're all meeting as a group, and most major cities have an Italian festival. And I had joined early on to the Italian American Civic League when I was 15 years old, actually, just shy of my 16th birthday. One of my best friend's fathers passed away. And as a tribute to him, we said, we need to keep this group going because it was something he was really passionate about. And he made a huge contribution to the organization. Charlie Fratto was his name. And so we got together as a group in high schoolers and said, hey, as a tribute to your father, we should go join this group and keep it going because without young blood coming in, it's going to die. And so we got together and did that. And then fast forward many years later, in 2014, a few of us got together and said, hey, we should really build an Italian festival here in Salt Lake City. It's a shame that Salt Lake City doesn't have this. We've got to promote our Italian culture. And so we talked about that. We actually got together with the mayor's office in Salt Lake City, and the mayor's office in Salt Lake City through their ACE fund, which is a fund they still operate today. I think we got $1,000 or $1,500 contribution, and which is a very small fraction, pennies of what it costs to put one of these things on. But at that point, we got that money, and you'll appreciate this concept, but I'm a huge believer in the concept of a brutta figura, right? Which is an Italian saying for you don't want to make a brutta figura, which is a bad impression, right? I guess an ugly figure, right, is what it literally means, but a bad impression. And I said, well, I'm not going to take this money and go back to them and say we couldn't pull this off. So it was so important for me that we didn't have egg on our face. We didn't make a brutta figura. And so we built the festival from that. And one thing led to another. We actually got connected to Colavita, which is a huge importer of olive oil and other Italian products. A friend of one of the Colavita family members was in our Italian group, and he said, hey, I actually know the Colavitas. I bet I get them to sponsor. And just all these fortuitous things happen. And so we built this festival. And the first year, we didn't know if anyone was going to come. We didn't know the first thing about advertising or running it. We basically shut down a street. There was a lot of things that went into that, a lot of learnings that we had to have. And I just remember to this day, there's a beautiful story about it in our Festa Italiana publication. But I remember we had the festival and we had the gates up, and it was about 11:30 in the morning, right? And the festival opened at noon. And we went to open the gates, and there was literally 100 people standing outside the gates waiting to get in. And we let them in. And I just remember this moment being up on the stage, and I was looking over the crowd. And I was just like, this is really beautiful. I can't believe we actually pulled this off. And it was still to this day, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. And what I love about it is that none of us have taken a penny from the organization. It's been very important to me that it's a nonprofit festival. And so what that means is we are able to make decisions that are focused on what the right thing is for the community, not what is profit generated. And it's been important to me to have that be one of our guiding principles, to say, you're doing this for the right reasons. You're doing this for the community, for Salt Lake City, for the Italians. And if you have other ulterior motives, this is not the place for you. And so we've just built such a beautiful organization. We have a great committee that puts it on. Everybody's volunteer. We've now passed over the reins from myself to Dana Rossi and Michael Ori and a committee of people. And it's just something I'm so proud about that we've been able to do this under those guidelines.
Well, so first, thank you for building it. I am really so happy that we do have it. And then second, starting from $1,000 and now having this massive 50,000 plus people that are coming every single year, it's, to say the least, it's impressive. So
yeah,
well done.
Well, and I got to meet you through the Festa Italiana. So that's the one,
That's true.
one big benefit. So no.
That's true. That's true. And today that you're juggling between being a CFO, an equity partner, a Honorary Consul of Italy, and the founder of Festa Italiana, when all those roles are pulling at your time and energy, how can you decide which one comes first?
Yeah, great question. I think that's, once again, I struggle with saying no. I want to be there for people, whether it's as a leader or whether it's as a community leader or whatever it is. So To me, it's just around prioritization, right? So really being able to look at what's the most important thing we need to be working with right now and just making sure that I'm dedicating my time to the times that needs to do that. Obviously, one of the other most important jobs that I think we all have is being parents and spouses and stuff. So sometimes there's trade-offs. And when I'm dedicated to something, I try to make sure that I'm completely dedicated to that, right? And so if I'm working on something, like that's my commitment and that's my number one priority. And so that also implies if I'm being a parent, right? If I'm going to go coach my kid's basketball game, like that's my focus right now. I'm going to try to not think about some of the other things going on in my life. The best way I could say it is to dive headfirst into what you're doing and really being passionate about it. It makes it a lot easier to work really hard and to work long hours when you're passionate about what you do. Don't be half in, half out. If you're going to do something, do it right, make the sacrifices that it takes because it's important. And I think ultimately it makes it easier. And then the other thing was when people that you're working with see you making that level of sacrifice and that level of commitment, they're much more willing to battle alongside with you. I very much am a believer of getting into the trenches, working as hard and leading by example. And I think that's been one of the ways that we've been successful, both in work, but also from an Italian festival experience, because I feel like a lot of people have seen the level of sacrifice that me and others have made, that a lot of people are willing to make that sacrifice because they know we're walking alongside of them and we're really working just as hard and caring.
Have you ever hit a point where you thought, well, it is just too much? Maybe I should just quit. Maybe I should just stop with something.
Yeah, I think there's times when I say no to stuff, right? I've been asked to be on boards and other things, and I just have to really think about what's a priority at that point. I think Festa Italiana is a great example. It was getting to the point where it's unsustainable personally. And so we really spent a lot of time building an amazing community and committee of people that are helping. We now have leaders that are taking it on. Dana and Michael, who I mentioned earlier, they've done such an amazing time with it that it's freed up my time to be able to focus on some of the other big picture things from an Italian community perspective, and also to be there as a resource and to help them. But being able to realize that this is not sustainable if I am what's holding this together. And so to really be willing to let go and let people learn and let people fail and let people grow, I think has been the best way for me to really just say, okay, this is not sustainable. And what I'm trying to build is something that's important to the community and bigger than me. So if I have to have my fingers in everything, then how can this grow without me? And so ultimately my goal is to continue to let people prosper and grow and learn. And I think that I've tried to take those lessons professionally, where being willing to let go of things.
Which it does make sense also, as you just point out, on a business standpoint. If it's just a one-man show, how can that company go on if one day I'm not going to be there? And we are always closing the podcast with one question. And the question is, if you could go back and change just one thing, it could be a decision, it could be a mindset, it could be something that you wish you knew. What would it be and why?
So I actually had a leader that I worked for several years ago, and he taught me a really important lesson. And I've tried to instill it in people that work for me now because it was a very valuable lesson. But it's okay to not have the answer to everything. I think I spent the first 10, 15 years of my career really focused on trying to be the smartest guy in the room. And sometimes that served me well at times, but sometimes it just was unsustainable, right? Or I wasn't really thinking through the answers. And I think sometimes the most credibility you can get from people is saying, I don't know the answer to that. Let me get back to you on that, or let me look into it, or let me go ask somebody that knows more than I do. And so that was one of the most important lessons that I've learned, that I've tried to instill in my children and in people that I work with. The answer sometimes is okay to say, I don't know, and let me go learn about that. And then I guess the other thing that I would say that has been an experience for me is taking the time to invest in yourself and invest in people. Because sometimes it's so easy to be like, let me just do that for you because I can do it in 5 minutes. Versus if I show you how to do it, it's going to take me an hour or 2 hours. But that investment that you make in that person can mean the difference to them throughout their career and really also just free you up to really trust that person can own it. I was so lucky in my career that my first job out of college, I was basically a staff accountant, and my boss was a former high school teacher, and he got into accounting. He was a controller, but he got into accounting later in life, but he was a high school teacher first. And that his ability to teach and show was a skill set that is so unique that I still to this day wish I could emulate. But just being able to invest into people and invest into people you care about, whether it's your kids or your spouse or to people you work with, I'd say those are probably the two experiences that I reflect back on that I would say was the best opportunity to be able to invest in yourself and better yourself throughout.
I love it. I love it. And Nick, so first, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. It has been a big pleasure to have you here on Behind Numbers.
Thank you, Alessandro. It's been an honor.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow Behind Numbers for more stories from the leaders shaping the future of business and finance. I am Alessandro Cozzi. See you next time.